Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today to talk about talent acquisition as a differentiator. And we have an amazing panel of guests with us. I'd like to go ahead and introduce them and have them tell you a little bit about themselves. So first up, Jeff Moore, VP of TA at Toast.
Hey everybody. It's nice to meet you. I'm Jeff Moore. I'm the Vice President of Talent Acquisition at Toast. I've been in the recruiting space for about 25 years. It's great to be here.
Welcome. All right, next up is Anand Lapid, Senior HR Director of Data and AI at Microsoft.
Hi all, my name is Anand Lapid. I lead the HR partnership for the customer solution area of AI and data for Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft 20 plus years. Excited to be with you today.
Amazing. Welcome, Anand. All right. And finally, we have Kristen McKenna, Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Walgreen Boots Alliance.
Great. Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I've been at Walgreens. I just celebrated my year anniversary, but I've been in talent acquisition for quite some time. I think I am with the same company as my two fellow panelists.
All right, amazing. I am super excited for this conversation amongst you experts. So I'm just going to go ahead and kick us off. I want to start with Kristen. Kristen, what do the C-suite and other business partners get wrong about TA?
I think what they get wrong about TA is that they invite us to the table when it's too late. So we typically find out about a position when a requisition hits a recruiter's desktop. And by that point, we're reactive. We don't have time to be planful. We don't have time to source. So we're relying on candidates that apply for the position as well as just-in-time sourcing versus building long-term relationships for candidates. And it's really hampering opportunities to bring in diverse candidates because that requires a period of time where you're building a strategy as well as building relationships with different candidates.
That is such a great answer. And I just want to sort of probe a little bit, and I'm curious to hear from the other panelists. You know, it seems like you're alluding to a proactive practice of talent acquisition, and you mentioned strategy, you mentioned outreach. I'm curious to hear from you or from other folks, what does a proactive approach to talent acquisition look like?
I think a lot of it, I'm interested in others as well, is really connected to workforce planning. And so how do we actually predict what roles could be coming? Certainly in the executive space, I think that managers and leaders have inklings as to when somebody on the team might be looking, or maybe there's a performance issue. How do they loop us into those conversations sooner than later? Or maybe they're working on succession planning and there's a gap in the succession plan. Well, why don't you bring in your executive search partners and start understanding externally who could fill that gap?
Great. Let's go. Hey, Jeff?
I will elaborate. I agree with everything that Kristen said. It's strategic. Start with strategic workforce planning to begin with, right? Invest the time to have detailed conversations with the business leaders about their talent needs in the upcoming fiscal year and the foreseeable future. Is anything changing in the talent needs? Are there new talent needs, new talent pools that are on the horizon? What's their external hiring mix, internal hiring mix, developing from within, supporting development from within, promoting from within, a mix that is right for them. Talent acquisition has multiple dimensions, right? How many executives, industry hires, college hires, so only if you have a proactive plan at place with a strategy, you can be proactive about it and not reactive and execute on a broad plan at place.
Yeah, I would just add quickly, there's sort of a TA expectations as well that I like to set, which is, you know, there's a certain amount of time it takes to fill a role and then a certain amount of time it takes to start. And those things you can move, but they don't just move overnight. And I think a lot of times business leaders will think, oh, I need 25 people next week. It doesn't really work that way. It's going to take us X amount of days to open the role, Y amount of days to fill the role, and Z amount of days for the person to start. And I think just being transparent with some of those facts really helps business leaders better plan.
Thank you. Thank you for those answers. And what I'm kind of hearing underneath what some of you are saying is almost shifting the framing of talent acquisition, from a administrative function to a core function, a strategic function. Can you share a eureka moment when you convinced a skeptical stakeholder that talent acquisition is, in fact, a strategic powerhouse? Like, what was it? What was a watershed project or metric that really got their attention, that changed their mind or turned their heads? I'm open for anyone to start.
I'm happy to share. I think a lot about a role that we were recruiting for, that we hired a lot of this profile. And so the role was open a lot. There were tons of them to fill. And when I started looking at the problem, we were looking at it very much as like a standard candidate funnel. And so we looked at it like it was one role, not 100 roles. And when you really started to peel apart the pieces, it wasn't one role 100 times. It was 100 different roles that were doing the same job in different locations and different levels and different industries, yada, yada, yada. And like the eye-opening was like, this isn't a high volume TA role. It's a high volume management role, leadership role, but it's actually a really bespoke recruiting role. And because the organization had always managed it like a high volume role where there were a lot of the same kind of person, the TA org had thought that way too. And when I sort of stepped in and was like, no, actually, this is not a high volume recruiting role, because we can't just use that humongous funnel. If we have 1,000 candidates that apply for a job that's in Boise, Idaho, I can't take those candidates and move them to Miami. Those are two different pipelines. And so it was one of those aha moments where we really sort of shifted mindsets to like a national, role by role strategy, as opposed to one humongous funnel, because people aren't that fungible.
That's great. That's great. Anyone else?
I was going to say pretty early on in my career. So I just started, I was probably only a recruiter for 5 or 6 years, and I was at Pfizer. And I had a very strategic, forward-thinking leader who he was changing the footprint of his organization globally. And I was brought to the table very early on with a lot of other leaders, HR people, to talk about what that looked like, what we needed to do, how we needed to actually engage individuals who we knew we would be impacting. How do we engage them quickly? How do we get them interested in opportunities at other sites? And it just really created a great strategic opportunity to engage the talent that we want. The outcomes were fabulous. And we actually blew our numbers out of the water in regards to how quickly we were able to secure talent as well as secure diverse talent. And so for me in my career, that was an aha moment, just to say, wow, this is how to do it. And I kind of carried that forward.
Yeah. Plus one to everything, I always find that the opportunity to engage in a strategic level, it always helps if the leaders themselves are strategic and willing to engage that way, open to engage that way. If not, the opportunity areas are when there is a unique business need that needs to be addressed. If there is a niche role, unique talent needs, unique location that you need to penetrate, you need to do hiring at scale and you need to operate differently, or you need to do very niche hiring. Every moment like that is an opportunity to elevate the conversation to a more strategic conversation, to put a more strategy and thoughtful plan at place, and then it's magic happens, because then you have a very, very different execution plan and the results and outcomes.
That's amazing. What I'm hearing from you all is strategy in terms of identifying the need, that from you, Einat. Strategy in terms of coming up with the nature of the role itself and making sure we're not taking a cookie cutter approach. And then finally, thinking just sort of a strategic approach to how we go about and engage that talent. And, Kristen, something that you said, really resonated with me. You keep tying this strategic approach to questions of diversity. And I think that can also be tied to questions of culture. And we know that the role of talent acquisition has shifted from merely recruiting to really thinking about what is at the core of a company's identity. Can you share an experience where you've had to tear down traditional TA paradigms and build something really radically different with that identity at its core? What was an audacious step that you took? How did that redefine success for your organization?
So I'm going to punt that to the other two and then come back to me.
I can take it from a little bit of a different direction, and that might create an appetite to answer differently. I've been at Microsoft for a long time, and I've lived through the evolution of the three main leadership changes of Microsoft, right? Moving the CEOs from Satya to Ballmer to Satya, from Gates to Ballmer to Satya. And remember, when Satya took over the leadership of Microsoft, there was a cultural crisis, there was a brand crisis. The positioning of Microsoft was not what we at Microsoft aspire to see in the marketplace. We were not the number one choice of high-tech early in career candidates to come and join this company. And Satya started the cultural transformation for Microsoft, which completely pivoted the branding and the values of Microsoft in the marketplace. And we have seen in our own eyes that transformation and how it's landing on applicants and candidates, and how Microsoft became more appealing to the earlier in career and also more experienced talent. So definitely the cultural shift, climate shift, and branding of a company has unique influence in the appeal factor of a company in the marketplace.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a quick. When I worked at Google, we had, you can imagine what the intern hiring was like at a place like that, just huge volume of candidates and applicants. And we found out that when we opened the intern racks, we'd get flooded with candidates in the first few days, and there'd be so many you couldn't get through them all. And when you dug deeper into the data, what you realize is that the students from the Stanfords, the amazing schools that have a lot of alumni at a place like Google, they know when the postings go live. They've got alumni that tell them it went live. They flood the applicant pool, which is amazing. It also limits the representation in your pipeline because some of those schools are more representative than others, or you want to shift the student mix from all students that go to Ivy Leagues to students that go to every school, and you want to sort of diversify that mix. And so what we found was, rather than posting one rack and hiring, whatever, I'm making up numbers, 5,000 interns, you actually do cohorts. So you post a job in September and you hire 1,000, and then you post a job in October, and then you hire 1,000 of that cohort. And then you sort of so rather than just doing this big bulk shotgun approach to recruiting, you do a really strategic, really thoughtful pacing of your hiring. And just that subtle change the entire demographics of the applicant pool by no other means other than just changing the calendar, which ends up having a huge impact on what that cohort of hires looks like, just because you're giving people that maybe they don't have an alumni that tells them, hey, the job got posted today, you should apply, the opportunity to find it on their own, or their opportunity to go to a career service offices that maybe it's never looked at it. And so a lot of times I think in TA, we can do these subtle things that seem silly. I mean, it just seems silly to say, oh yeah, we posted it. But they have this ripple effect through the entire pipeline, because you're being intentional with your posting strategy to sort of drive different outcomes than just constantly going, shotgun, we need volume, we need volume, we need volume. And so that's one example where I've sort of been able to see that.
Yeah. And cohort reminded me of another example. So when I was at ESPN, they have what's called a content associate program. So when you hire young individuals into production, they typically start in the content associate program, which is in Connecticut. There's not a naturally huge diverse population in Connecticut. And there's also a feeling, right, if someone's down south or in the Midwest or out west, they don't really want to come to Connecticut. So what we actually did is started creating cohorts of hiring within this program, which we found was super successful in regards to recruiting, because now we knew, it wasn't onesies and twosies. We had classes that were starting. But what we also found within the classes is that you had like-minded individuals who are all basically in the same area of their career, just starting out. And they were forming relationships, and they had their first best friends at work and in the area. So when you had diverse individuals that you were relocating, it actually enhanced our retention of those individuals, and we found that they were staying longer with the organization.
Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I really want to kind of dig into the cohort piece. And I actually do want to ask both of you, Jeff and Kristen, because you sort of brought this up in your answer of, how this sort of changed the diversity of applicants that you brought into your organization. As you may know, I'm the president and CEO of a diversity firm, a culture firm. So obviously I'm very passionate about this, but can you talk a little bit about the impact that that change in the change in the very nature of the talent that you brought in, the broader impact that had on the organization as a whole, just to drill down a little bit?
Yeah, I think that when you think about sports media, right? When you think about the content is speaking to different audiences. So you have to have people that look like your audiences. And so there was definitely a lot of initiatives to increase our Hispanic hiring, because Hispanics who were tuning into ESPN was growing exponentially year over year. And so we had to make sure that we had individuals in content who knew what the content was or what it should be to actually speak to the audiences that we were looking to engage. And you can't, lack of a better word, you can't do that with all individuals who look the same, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have, and it's not even so much diversity of demographics, which for sure that's the driver, but you also get diversity of thought, which I think is super important for any organization, regardless of what the industry is, but particularly when you're dealing with broadcasting and media. It's really important, diversity of thought. And again, I think it for sure changed the retention of diverse individuals, because again, they felt like they had a community when they joined ESPN versus one individual who's 1,000 miles from home and might not see anybody in their immediate group that looks like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Kristen. I mean, I think that's the thing that you really drive, is you drive engagement, you drive community, which ultimately drives retention across the board, because there are more people that are like you. Doesn't matter what you are. There's more people like you because you've broadened out that pool. I don't remember. I wish I remembered all the exact nitty-gritty details of that project I spoke about. But one of the things, I think Google targeted like 50 schools or something like that when originally we had launched the programs. But when we did that work, we made hires from like 350 or something. And so just the richness of different school programs, you just end up bringing in a much more representative of who the country is. And if you think about, a company like Toast or a company like a Google or Microsoft, they serve everybody. Everybody uses something from a company like that. And so really making sure that workforce is representative of everybody, which sounds really corny, but it is, that ends up driving so much richness in the products, in the business, but also in like the culture, the engagement, how people feel, affinity groups, all of those things really just start to blossom because you've got that richness in your employee base. So there's a lot there.
That's great. Thank you all so much for that. It does sound super exciting. And I think that, right now we're talking a little bit about culture and also how, in terms of the customer talent acquisition connection, overall external connection is so important. And I want to shift a little bit to an overlapping area, which is business strategy and overall impact. So, I think we also see that talent acquisition plays a really crucial organization in shaping those as well. Can each of you share a successful strategy or initiative that you implemented to reframe TA's impact within your respective organizations? How did those strategies contribute to growth, employer branding, resource allocation, really sort of thinking along those lines? And what were some key takeaways for you?
I'll give a generic example for business reasons, but it can create an appetizer for us to start the dialogue. One of my client group was trying to create an incubation breakthrough new category project that needed to penetrate new markets. Okay, and in order to do that, you can't just rely on the existing leadership team or extended leadership team or existing talent that is at place as is, because people that have been working for a long time on certain type of products have a tendency to do things in a certain way and to think about business strategy and execution in a certain way. And if you want to break through and divert into a different direction, you need to insert that diversity of thoughts and richness of new ideas into the discussion and into the dialogue. So we connected the strategy and the intent with the talent acquisition strategy all together and purposefully inserted new talent that is very different in the mindset and experiences, from leadership to middle leadership to more earlier in career talent, so that we can create that dialogue and infusion of new ideas into the creation of the new business strategy. And it was hugely successful. But that's an example where you connect the business strategy to the talent acquisition strategy and drive forward in a different way.
That's great. That's great. Anyone else?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but if I think about my role at Walgreens, it's really about the foundation of talent acquisition, so the operations, the technology. And when it comes to a retail pharmacy organization, right? The biggest, I think, thing that keeps leadership up at night is finding pharmacists, right? That pool of individuals is shrinking by the year, and part of what I look at talent acquisition is how do we engage them where they are? How do we engage them and create a great experience? And in looking at our current technology, it doesn't at all do that. Right. So you apply for a job at Walgreens today, and the first thing you get is, this is going to take you 15 to 22 minutes. You're like, are you kidding me? Right? Like, candidates aren't going to sit for that. So we're embarking on what I'm calling a proof of concept, which, the dollars is not insignificant, but it's not significant either, to really show the business what a technology that has artificial intelligence and really takes a lot of the work off of store managers, because they are our recruiters out in the field. And so if we can actually show them the value, and I am pretty much suspecting that once you have this small population of store managers who are like, this is the best thing since sliced bread, they're going to tell 5 people who will tell 5 people. And the next thing you know, it's going to be more of a pull than a push. And when you have to go to, the powers that be and ask for 3 times more than what you're currently paying for your applicant tracking system, then I think that will be really, really powerful to kind of get us where we need to be.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would share. I think I've done it in every role I've ever had. Is talk a lot about, we talk a lot about cost per hire, right? It's like one of the big metrics everyone talks about, but no one ever talks about the amount of time to hire. So, you want to hire 100 people. Oh, please come in and meet with 17 interviewers on the panel. Well, there's costs there. It may not show up in the invoices that we sign off on, but it shows up in the, the hourly rate of making a hire. And so spend a lot of time looking at, like, what's the average number of interviewers? How many do we have? And then looking at external research around, once you get past 4 or 5, decision-making actually goes down, but cost is going up. So how do you use like a combination of internal data and priorities, external best practices to figure out what's the right story for your org, to land in a place where you're still comfortable in your assessment of that talent, but you're also being conscious of the the runaway cost of, oh, let me just add one more interview. Let me just have one more person talk to them.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you've spent more in interviewer time than you did in salary for your hire.
And I also think to that point, it's also the impression that you're giving to your candidates. So why do I want to join an organization that it's so democratic that they need to cast of thousands to make a decision? Because to me, that tells me the difficulty of my job when I get there to actually get things done.
That's such a great point. I'm smiling because I've seen evolution from interview loops with 8, 9 people, and it is a democratic process. And if one or two objects, then it's a no, and then we go again, right? And you interview 15 candidates for a job, not as an executive job, a job. And we started to try to be more sophisticated about looking at the cost to make a hire, beyond the cost of hire. How many candidates do we need to interview in general in order to make a hire decision? How many interviewers need to meet a candidate? And it is also the branding and the external face, right? If I'm a candidate, and I have choices, I might choose not to join a company when I need to meet 10 people. If another company quickly in a day or two I meet with 3 people and they want me fairly immediately, right? So it's not just a sell market, it's also a sell buy market, and the company needs to make an impression as well, and we forget it often. Microsoft is trying to get to a point, both for internal and external candidates, where we limit the number of interviews to 3. It has been a very, very rough change management, still is, because what do you mean only 3? Not everybody on the team needs to meet that candidate that we are inserting into the team. And the answer is no. Pick your best interviewers. You know who they are, right? You have people that are better assessor of talent than others. 3, make a decision, move on.
You know, it's so funny in these answers from you, I hear the connection between talent acquisition and operational efficiency, talent acquisition, resource allocation, talent acquisition, and employer branding. And I actually want to go in that direction right now, Jeff, and ask you a question. As a senior TA leader, how have you seen the role of talent acquisition evolve to influence growth strategies and employer branding? And can you share an example of how TA has helped bridge business strategies and the talent market at Toast?
Yeah, I was going to start by saying, I'm old, because I think when I first got my first recruiting job, we were handed a rec list like we were, going to the supermarket and asked to deliver, which is so not how the world works today. I think some of the best examples of that are, sort of happen this time of year, at least for me, where, we enter the annual planning season. And the annual planning season is this back and forth conversation between business leaders, their finance departments, their TA department. And I remember working with a business leader in a previous role. It wasn't at Google. And they wanted to 3x their team size, and their team was not small at the time. And we had this amazing dialogue where I was there, their finance leader was there, and everybody put their cards on the table on like, A, what can we afford? B, what's it gonna take? And then sort of C, like, do we actually really want to do this? And it was really interesting because there were a whole lot of other dynamics. But what ended up happening through that conversation is it sort of forced a prioritization of, well, we don't want to double the whole org. We want to double this part of the org, or we want to move this piece of the team. Whereas like when a lot of times companies do like a bottom up build when you go into the next year planning, where it's like, hey, everyone give your wish list. Well, the wish list for this leader was like, 3x your team. And as we started to prioritize and push back and go through all the details, it wasn't 3x the whole team. It was 3x this piece of engineering, 3x this piece of go to market. Actually hold flat in this part of the business. And it ended up being a really cool exercise. where rather than going to the CFO and saying, we'd like to 3x the organization, that leader went to the CFO and said, I want to increase by, whatever the percentage was. It actually ended up being low. They're like, well, here's some slush headcount if you want to move things around later. And I look back on it and I think to myself, like, boy, what a different conversation if we'd have walked into the first meeting saying, I want to 3x the organization, and the CFO was thinking, grow up by 50%. And instead we go in and say, we want to grow by, I'm making up numbers now, 40%, and here's a 10% slush fund for you. Like, what a different outcome, for the business, for that leader, for the company overall, probably for my sanity and my hairline to not have to 3x an organization. But, I find that sort of the best outcomes are always when a business leader has an idea. Like, I want to do X. Doesn't matter if it's a great idea, a bad idea, fully baked, half baked. And they've got their TA leader in their back pocket from ideation, being able to be really, really, really tight in that partnership. That's where the magic happens, because you don't overextend yourself as a business, and you also don't overpromise and undeliver as a TA leader, which to me is sort of like the worst outcome you can have, is if you underdeliver on a promise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think this is such a wonderful example, and I'll connect it to the beginning of our conversation when we discussed the strategic nature of the talent acquisition leader.
Mm-hmm.
The business leader have an idea, a thought about what they need in order to take their business forward. And that's a starting point. And now the conversation starts, right? And the talent acquisition is a strategic leader by the leader's side that helps them clarify what their true needs are and helps them execute on that. Because the business leader might really need that ×3 expansion, but they don't have the money to support it. And then the conversation is about where in the world can we achieve the growth that is needed, right? Because today the world is global for many, many industries, and we have different costs of doing business in different places. We have different talent pools in different places. So that's one conversation to be made. Hybrid open up the world in a different way to many, many industries as well, right? Or have that conversation with the clarity of, great that this is what you think you need, but actually the business can only expand that much, and maybe it's a financial constraint, maybe it's a time to hire constraints, ramp up constraints. So really clarifying the situation and doing that strategic partnership and engagement to execute in the best way for the business.
Yeah, for sure. And even I think sometimes, right, being at the table when businesses are talking about not only starting a new business, but maybe opening up a new location, right? Is there actually a natural candidate pool in that location? And if there's not, where's the nearest location? And, what are the cost implications of that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to open up, let's just say, a technology center in, Timbuktu, and there's absolutely no software engineers in the area, well, guess what? You're relocating every single person to that area, which just exponentially increases their budget.
I think this conversation is so fascinating because, Einat, as you said, it does connect back to the beginning of our conversation and how we were talking about proactive approaches to talent acquisition, but it also sort of just serves as a reminder that really business strategy and talent acquisition are in partnership, and it is incumbent upon a lot of TA professionals to also think strategically as they're making some of their decisions and encourage leaders to do so as well. Einat, I'm curious, with your 25 years of experience in HR and your work with leadership effectiveness, how do you view the role of TA in resource allocation, particularly in the data and AI sectors in Microsoft? And how have you ensured alignment with the overall strategic goals of the organization? So a lot of what we're already talking about right now.
Absolutely. It's a great example because those are areas that evolve in front of our eyes, right? Mm-hmm. We have a creation of new talent pools. We have a creation of new talent needs. We have decreased priority in talent needs that only a year ago were very, very in high demand as well. So it's a true talent management and the talent acquisition in the most strategic way at large, because you need to be in those times right at the right side of the leaders, by their side, translating to them talent implications, translating to them where they might want to go and explore, having creating the appetite to have the conversation about where the organization needs will be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, not just today, because the pressure on today is so large. But if we want to plan right now to the future, to the near future, not even talking 5 years from now, then we have already missed the market, right? So it forces a much deeper and connected relationship, and it pushes us to a more evolved talent acquisition at large, because we need constantly to anticipate the future needs and not just the today, what the leader is telling us that they need immediately.
Yeah. And that's spot on, right? And I would say, for those of you who are going to be in the audience for this presentation, I think a lot of talent acquisition professionals get frustrated because it's not that the business doesn't want them at the table. Sometimes it's their HR partners, right? And I think, we need to remember that relationship is just as critical. And we need to make sure that we are presenting our strengths to that population and they understand that we can be trusted. Because sometimes I remember an HR person said, recruiters are a bunch of yahoos, they can't be trusted. They're talking to everybody. Well, yeah, we're talking to everybody. That's our job, but it doesn't mean we can't be trusted with confidential information. So I think, that relationship is super critical between the HR business partners and talent acquisition.
That's. I think that's super insightful, and I do want to spend some time talking about talent acquisition and other partnerships inside the business. But first, I want to talk about technology and data, because I know that that's probably on the minds of a lot of folks in the audience. Kristen, in your role, you focus on creating enhanced experiences through insights and efficient processes. Can you discuss how you've used talent acquisition data to set impactful goals and drive actionable decisions at Walgreens or previous companies? And I'm curious to hear from the other panelists after Kristen as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think a great example is while I was at ESPN, again, kind of comes back to workforce planning. ESPN was starting something little called the ACC Network. And it was about a year before launch that they commissioned a team to get together and said, okay, what do we need? How many roles do we need? Where is the ACC network going to be located? And we, again, had advance notice, and it was a proactive approach. And the first thing we actually started with is understanding through past metrics, how many of these roles do we think were actually going to be filled internally versus externally? Because what we had forgotten a little bit with the previous network, which was the SEC network, is that when you start pulling from your current teams, their internal workers, we have a problem, right? So you kind of sort of need to be cognizant of that. We want to give internal individuals the opportunity to grow and to move into other opportunities. But at the same time, we need to think about how are we going to backfill those roles. And for the ACC network, that was super critical because they were launching during college football, the start of college football. So we need to make sure that if we were pulling content associates, producers, associate producers from any type of college football content, that we need to make sure that we had those backfills ready to go when the ACC network launched. We also had the opportunity to, again, kind of have a lens towards diversity. So if we were going to fill a bunch of associate producers and we knew we were going to pull them from the content associate program and we didn't think the content associate program was diverse enough, how do we make sure that we keep a couple of those roles to go externally to the market? And how do we make sure that, again, we have the strategy to actually backfill those roles for which they're coming from? And that was all based on metrics. What is our typical time to fill? What is our typical ratio of internal hires versus external hires? how do we plan the budget accordingly? So if the ACC network is going to be in North Carolina, do we have a requisite, external team there or internal team there that can move into these roles, or are we going to actually have to pay for relocation? So all of that came into business decisions with finance. What is the budget going to be for this network as it relates to the hiring?
Yeah, I'm happy. I mean, like for me, data is everything. I like probably have a data problem. Whether it's pass-through rates, applicant rates at the top of the house, time to fill, time to start, time to get a job from finance into Workday and open on my job, like you name it, I'm on all of the data. Because a lot of times there's a story within some of the data that doesn't, if it's taking, I don't know, I'm going to make things up. If it normally takes 3 days for a job to go from showing up with finance to being on the jobs page, and all of a sudden it's taking 7 days, why? Why is that? Our manager's burned out, our recruiter's not operating. What is happening beneath the data? And so I have like a crazy problem with data where I want it all. I want to spend time in it because it allows me to see things without my biases and my perceptions, which I know I have. I've been doing this a long time. I think I know everything and I don't. But the data allows me to see those areas and go, that's not what I was expecting. Or, we ran this pilot program. And the data did validate that was going to work. And so I just all day long on the data.
Yeah. I agree. And it's comparing the data, right? So how do you look year over year at your data? How do you look month over month at your data, right? Because I've presented data and people have said, well, so what? Is that good? Like, does that mean we're doing well? And so you have to be able to answer that question. And to your point, right? How do you, if there is something that's changed and you're going from 3 days to 7 days, there's something inherently in the process that's broken if that's happened.
Totally.
Yeah, the data always tell a story. So it's the insights from the data, and it's both trend year over year, period over period, but also how do you compare yourself to external benchmark, right?
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. I feel like we could go on for another 45 minutes, but I think we don't quite have that. So I would love to thank you all for joining today and for sharing your experiences and a couple of tools and strategies that folks can use as they're engaging with their talent acquisition work. And I just really wish you all the best. So thank you so much for spending this 45 minutes with us. And I really hope that you all can keep the conversation going.